Lurians begged the savage humans for help fighting off the ruthless Zorgons, hoping their violent new allies wouldn't conquer them next. Jeffrey Jones, Earth's most cunning diplomat, stepped off the shuttlecraft onto the alien soil of planet Lure. The Lurian dignitaries shuffled forward to greet him, their frail limbs trembling. Jeffrey towered over the diminutive aliens. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador Jones," said Keed, the Lurian leader. His large eyes darted about nervously. "I'm afraid our situation is quite dire." As they walked to the council chambers, Kaid explained their plight. For centuries, the Lurians had been easy prey for the warlike races of the galaxy due to their weak physiology. The recent aggression by the expansionist Zorgon Empire threatened their very existence. Zorgon warships loomed ominously at their borders. "We are prepared to offer your people access to our technology in exchange for military protection," Kaid said. "Your fearsome reputation precedes you." In the council chambers, Jeffrey laid out the proposed alliance terms. Some Lurian counselors protested. "Humans are uncouth brutes. How can we trust them? This will drag us into their conflicts and wars." Keed tried to maintain order as the debate grew heated. Suddenly, a massive boom shook the building. Alarms blared. "A Zorgon ship has entered our capital's airspace! They're attacking the city!" a Lurian soldier cried out. The council fell into panicked chaos. Jeffrey grabbed the wounded Keed and ran, barely making it to a bunker as explosions rocked the city. "We're out of options," Keed groaned, green blood oozing from his injuries. "We accept your alliance." Jeffrey hailed the human battle fleet hidden in a nearby system. "It's a go. Get here now." Human warships dropped out of warp, launching a fierce counterattack on the Zorgon fleet. Enhanced by reverse-engineered Lurian tech, the human weapons tore into the enemy ships. The people of Lure watched in awe as the humans destroyed their hated oppressors. Maybe these savages weren't so bad after all. In the aftermath, Jeffrey and Keed signed the alliance treaty as the Lurian Council looked on uneasily, still wary of their new human allies. Suddenly, a message came through. The Zorgon Emperor was enraged by the defeat. He had amassed an armada 10 times the size of the failed attack force. They were coming to annihilate the Lurians for their defiance and punish the humans for intervening. Jeffrey and Kaid looked grimly at each other, knowing this was just the beginning. The Lurian-human alliance would be put to the ultimate test in the coming war. The survival of both their peoples hung in the balance. They had to win. Failure was not an option. With the looming Zorgon threat hanging over their heads, Jeffrey and Keed worked around the clock. They pored over star maps and defense plans, trying to plug every possible gap the Zorgons could exploit. The door to the war room whooshed open and Captain Mike Thompson strode in, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He dropped the bag on the table with a heavy thunk. "Mike, glad you could make it," Jeffrey said, clasping his friend's hand. "The Lurians need our help now more than ever." Mike nodded, his eyes hardened. "I'll whip them into shape. By the time I'm done, they'll be able to take on a Zorgon barehanded." Over the next few days, Mike put the Lurian troops through a grueling training regimen. He showed them how to strip and reassemble human rifles in seconds, how to set explosive charges for maximum damage, and how to take down a foe twice their size with a few well-placed strikes. At first, the Lurians balked at the intensity of the training. They flinched at the bark of gunfire and shied away from the bone-crushing hand-to-hand drills. But as they saw their skills improve, a new commitment settled over them. They started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could stand up to the Zorgons. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and Keed worked to uncover the Zorgons' battle plans. They intercepted encrypted transmissions and bribed informants, slowly piecing together a picture of the coming invasion. What they discovered made their blood run cold. "The Emperor has over 1,000 ships," Kaid whispered, his voice trembling. "They'll be here in days. We can't possibly fight off a fleet that size." Jeffrey stared at the star map, his mind racing. They needed to act fast, to hit the Zorgons before they could bring their full might to bear. An idea started to form, a desperate gamble that just might work. "We have to strike first," Jeffrey said, Hit them at their staging ground before they can launch the invasion. Keed's eyes widened. A preemptive attack? It's too risky. If we fail, we'll have nothing left to defend ourselves with. Jeffrey put a hand on Keed's shoulder. If we don't act now, we won't have anything left to defend. This is our only chance. In the end, Keed relented. They gathered their forces, a ragtag fleet of human and Lurian ships, and set out for the Zorgan staging area. They knew the odds were against them, but they had to try. As they neared the staging ground, Jeffrey gave the order. Human stealth ships darted forward, slipping past the Zorgon sensors. They launched a volley of nuclear missiles, the warheads detonating in blinding flashes among the enemy fleet. For a moment, it seemed like the plan had worked. Dozens of Zorgon ships burned, their hulls riddled with holes. But then the Zorgons rallied, their remaining vessels surging forward in a vengeful wave. The battle raged, human and Lurian ships fighting side by side against the overwhelming Zorgon force. Explosions lit up the void, the acrid smell of burnt metal filling the air. Jeffrey knew they were losing. The Zorgons were too many, too strong. In a last desperate gamble, he gathered a boarding party and fought his way onto the Zorgon flagship, battling through the halls until he reached the bridge. There he confronted the Zorgan admiral, a towering figure clad in battle armor. They clashed in a furious melee, Jeffrey's human strength pitted against the admiral's cybernetic enhancements. It was a close fight, but in the end, Jeffrey emerged victorious. With a final triumphant cry, he drove his blade through the admiral's chest, sending the Zorgon crashing to the deck. With the admiral dead, the Zorgon fleet fell into disarray. The human and Lurian ships seized the advantage, tearing into the enemy ranks with renewed ferocity. In the end, the Zorgons were routed, their once proud fleet reduced to burning ruins. Word of the victory spread like wildfire, sparking celebration across the galaxy. The human-Lurian alliance had done the impossible, shattering the myth of Zorgon invincibility. On Lure, Jeffrey and Cade were greeted as saviors, their names cheered in every city and village. The Lurian Council pledged their eternal gratitude, vowing to stand with humanity against any foe. But even as they basked in the glow of victory, Jeffrey and Cade knew their trials were nowhere near the end. The Zorgon Emperor was sure to retaliate, to unleash the full might of his empire against those who had defied him. And in the shadows, whispers of dissent began to grow. Some Lurians feared their new allies, worried that humanity's influence would erode their culture and way of life. They watched the human soldiers warily, muttering of occupation and subjugation. Jeffrey and Cade did their best to quiet these fears, to assure the Lurians that humanity came as friends, not conquerors. But they knew the hardest battles were yet to come. As they planned their next move, an urgent message arrived. An anonymous source claimed to have information about a secret Zorgon weapon, a doomsday device that could lay waste to entire worlds. Jeffrey and Cade exchanged a worried glance. They couldn't afford to ignore such a threat, but they also couldn't risk walking into a trap. In the end, they knew what they had to do. They would investigate this lead personally, tracing it to its source no matter the risk. The fate of the stars depended on it. As they prepared for their mission, Jeffrey and Cade could only hope that their fragile alliance would hold, that humans and Lurians would stand together no matter the challenges ahead. For in the face of the Zorgon threat, unity was their only hope. Jeffrey Jones paced the war room, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the message they'd received. The anonymous tip about a secret Zorgon weapon gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was their best shot at turning the tide of the war. "We have to check it out," Jeffrey said, turning to Cade. The Lurian leader nodded, his large eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "I agree, but we must proceed with caution," Cade replied. "This could easily be a trap." Jeffrey nodded. "We'll take a small team. Mike, you're with us, and we'll bring a squad of those Lurian troops you've been training." Within hours, their stealth ship slipped silently through the inky void of space, pushing deeper into Zorgon-controlled territory. The tension aboard was palpable as they neared the coordinates provided by their mysterious informant. As they approached the desolate asteroid field, a transmission crackled through their comms. "Identify yourselves or be destroyed," a gruff voice demanded. Jeffrey exchanged a glance with Keed before responding. "We're here about the weapon. We got your message." There was a long pause before the voice returned. "Dock at these coordinates. Come alone and unarmed." Following the instructions, they found themselves face-to-face with Vrath, a Zorgan scientist whose scales seemed dulled by stress and lack of sleep. His eyes darted nervously as he ushered them inside his hidden base. "The World Breaker," Vrath said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a planet killer. The Emperor plans to use it on Lure." Keed's face paled at the news. Jeffrey leaned in, his voice urgent. "Where is it? How do we stop it?" Vrath pulled up schematics on a battered console. "It's nearly complete, hidden in a nebula at these coordinates, but we have to hurry." The scientist's words were cut short by the shriek of alarms. Outside, Zorgan warships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons charging. "They found us!" Vrath cried, frantically transferring data to Kaid's device. Jeffrey's team burst into action. Mike rallied the Lurian soldiers, their human training kicking in as they took up defensive positions. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Zorgon troops stormed the base. "Fall back!" Jeffrey shouted, providing covering fire as they retreated to their ship. Vrath stumbled, a stray bolt catching him in the chest. As he fell, he pressed a data chip into Kaid's hand. "Stop them!" the Zorgon scientist gasped before going still. They fought their way back to the ship, Jeffrey and Mike working in sync to clear a path. The Lurian troops proved their worth, their precise shots dropping Zorgon after Zorgon. As they lifted off, enemy fire rocked their hull. Jeffrey gritted his teeth, pushing the engines to their limit. They shot into hyperspace just as a Zorgon cruiser lined up its main guns. Back in safe space, Kaid examined the data Vrath had given them. "We have the location of the shipyard," he said, his voice grim. "But how can we possibly stop a weapon of this magnitude?" Jeffrey's eyes gleamed with willpower. "We'll find a way. We have to. For Lure, for Earth, for every world threatened by the Zorgons." They rendezvoused with their fleet, gathering every ship and soldier they could muster. Using the stealth technology developed from Lurian innovations, they approached the hidden Zorgon shipyard. As they emerged from the nebula's swirling gases, they saw it, the World Breaker. It dwarfed every ship in their fleet, a massive cannon protruding from its bow like the barrel of some cosmic gun. "By the stars," Kaid breathed, his eyes wide with horror. Jeffrey set his jaw, addressing the combined human and Lurian forces. "This is it. Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. We take out that weapon, or we die trying." With that, they launched their assault. Human and Lurian ships swarmed the shipyard, drawing fire as Jeffrey led a strike team to infiltrate the World Breaker itself. Inside the massive vessel, alarms blared as they fought their way through waves of Zorgan defenders. Mike and the Lurian troops held the line, their weapons blazing as they pushed towards the reactor core. "Keed, set the charges!" Jeffrey shouted over the din of battle. "We'll hold them off." As Kaid worked to overload the reactor, a towering figure stepped into view. Supreme Commander Wrath, the Emperor's right hand. The Zorgon's cybernetic enhancements glowed ominously as he raised his weapon. "You dare challenge the might of the Zorgon Empire?" Wrath roared, opening fire. Jeffrey dove for cover, returning fire as he shouted to Keed. "How much longer?" "Almost there," Keed called back, his fingers flying over the alien controls. Suddenly, Wrath was upon them. With a savage blow, he sent Keed flying, the Lurian's frail body crumpling against a bulkhead. Something snapped inside Jeffrey. With a primal roar, he charged Wrath, abandoning all caution. The two titans clashed in a fury of fists and steel. Wrath's cybernetic strength threatened to overwhelm Jeffrey, but the human's speed and ferocity kept him in the fight. They traded blows that would have felled lesser beings, neither willing to yield. Just as Wrath seemed to gain the upper hand, Jeffrey saw an opening. He ducked under a wild swing and drove his combat knife deep into a gap in Wrath's armor. The Zorgan commander staggered, green blood spurting from the wound. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Jeffrey tackled Wrath, sending them both crashing to the deck. He rained down blow after blow until the Zorgon lay still. Panting, Jeffrey staggered to his feet. He rushed to Keed's side, relief washing over him as he found the Lurian still breathing. "It's done," Keed wheezed. "The reactor's going critical." Jeffrey scooped up his injured friend, shouting into his comm, "All units fall back. This whole place is gonna blow." They ran through the chaos of the disintegrating shipyard, boarding their escape craft with seconds to spare. As they rocketed away, the world breaker erupted in a cataclysmic explosion that lit up the nebula like a newborn star. In the days that followed, news of the world breaker's destruction spread like wildfire. The Zorgon war machine, once thought unstoppable, had been dealt a crippling blow. On Lure, Jeffrey watched from his hospital bed as crowds gathered in the streets, celebrating their newfound hope. Keed, his wounds slowly healing, sat beside him. "We've won a great victory," Keed said softly, "but the war is not nearly finished." Jeffrey nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "The Zorgans will be back, and when they come, we'll be ready." The summit chamber lay in ruins, shattered glass and debris scattered across the once pristine floor. Jeffrey Jones stood amid the chaos, his weapon still warm in his hands. The body of Vengath, the Zorgon radical, lay crumpled at his feet, a pool of green blood spreading beneath it. Delegates huddled in corners, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Some wept quietly, while others stared at Jeffrey with a mixture of gratitude and horror. The human commander holstered his weapon and began helping people to their feet. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're safe now." Cade approached, his usually immaculate robes torn and stained. The Lurian leader's large eyes were clouded with an emotion Jeffrey had never seen before, a mix of relief and something darker. "The explosives have been disarmed," Cade reported, his voice low. "But the cost—" They both looked around at the devastation. Bodies of both Zorgan commandos and innocent attendees littered the floor. The air reeked of ozone and burnt flesh. Outside, the sounds of panic and confusion filled the streets of the Lurian capital. The electromagnetic pulse had plunged the city into darkness, and now fires blazed unchecked in several districts. As emergency services scrambled to restore order, news of the attack spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Within hours, the network of communicator buoys that connected the various worlds lit up with chatter. On the planet Nexus Prime, a hub of interstellar commerce, crowds gathered around public view screens. Footage of Jeffrey gunning down Vengath played on repeat, eliciting gasps and murmurs from the assembled aliens. "Is this what the humans call justice?" A tentacled, gloopy merchant chittered to his neighbor, a crystalline Prismian. The Prismian's facets flickered with uncertainty. "They saved the hostages, but at what cost? Such violence!" Similar scenes played out across 100 worlds. On the desert planet Skorkus, the reptilian inhabitants hissed their approval of the humans' decisive action. But on peaceful Etheria, the floating cities buzzed with concern over aligning themselves with such a militant race. Back on Lure, Jeffrey and Cade found themselves besieged by questions and demands. In a hastily convened press conference, they stood side by side, trying to present a united front. "The actions taken today were necessary to save innocent lives," Jeffrey stated, his lips pursed. "We regret the loss of life, but make no mistake. We will defend our alliance against any threat." Cade nodded, though his posture was stiff. "The Lurian people stand with our human allies. We too have learned the cost of freedom in these dark times." But even as they spoke, cracks in the alliance were already forming. In the Lurian council chambers, heated debates raged long into the night. "How can we trust these humans?" Councillor Zev demanded, his crest flaring with agitation. "They resort to bloodshed far too quickly." "And what would you have done?" Councillor Mira shot back. "Let Vengath slaughter us all?" The arguments spilled out onto the streets. In the university district, students staged protests against what they saw as human aggression. But in the military quarter, grizzled Lurian veterans raised toasts to their human comrades. As the days passed, the ripple effects of the summit attack spread further. On the formerly neutral world of Thalassia, the aquatic inhabitants voted to formally join the Human-Lurian alliance, seeking protection against any future Zorgan resurgence. But for every world that joined, another withdrew. The peaceful Harmonians of Syrinx 7 formally severed all ties with both humans and Lurians, closing their borders and retreating into isolation. Amid the turmoil, Jeffrey and Kaid met in private, away from the prying eyes of the media and their own advisors. In a small, dimly lit room deep within the Lurian Central Command, they faced each other across a simple table. "We've changed the galaxy, Jeff," Kaid said softly, using the human's nickname for the first time. "But I fear we've changed ourselves even more." Jeffrey nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "We did what we had to do, but you're right. There's no going back now." "My people are divided," Kaid continued. "Some see you as saviors, others as dangerous savages. And I broke a Zorgon's neck with my bare hands. I never thought myself capable of such an act." "War changes us all," Jeffrey replied. "The question is, where do we go from here?" They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their decisions heavy upon them. Finally, Kaid spoke. "We cannot undo what has been done, but perhaps we can shape what is to come. Our alliance must stand, Jeff, for both our people's sake." Jeffrey nodded, reaching across the table to clasp Kaid's slender hand. "Together, then, whatever comes next." As they emerged from their meeting, both leaders knew that the true test of their alliance was just beginning. The galaxy watched and waited, fear and respect mingling in equal measure as humanity and the Lurians charted a new course through the stars.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.